On April 20th, 1945, artillery could be heard in Berlin as Adolf Hitler turned 56 beneath the Reich Chancellery garden. Above him, a capital already wrecked by bombing was waiting for the Red Army. Below it, he received birthday visitors, issued orders, and chose to remain. The decision was not brave defiance. It bound Berlin's remaining soldiers and civilians to a battle Germany could not win. He still spoke of formations moving on maps. Many existed only as fragments, exhausted survivors, or names on paper. Outside, Soviet armies were closing from the east, while Western Allied forces had crossed deep into Germany. The Third Reich had promised 1,000 years. Its leader was now measuring time in rooms without daylight. The bunker had electricity, water, telephones, map rooms, bedrooms, and a narrow hierarchy of people who still carried out routines. Yet no amount of concrete could restore the armies Hitler had already spent. On April 21st, Soviet forces pushed into Berlin's eastern suburbs. Hitler's staff discussed a counterattack by the small force under SS commander Felix Steiner. On paper, the order looked like a rescue. In reality, Steiner lacked the men, armor, and ammunition to strike as demanded. The gap between the map and the city widened by the hour. Hitler was not simply cut off from information. He kept demanding a world that had ceased to exist. The next report would force that fiction into the open. On April 22nd, Hitler learned that Steiner could not attack. Witnesses described an explosive outburst in the bunker conference room. Accounts vary, but the event's meaning does not. The promised relief force was not coming. Hitler told those present that the war was lost, then decided he would stay in Berlin and die there. Even after this admission, orders continued to flow toward other formations. General Walter Wenck's 12th Army was told to turn east. General Theodor Busse's 9th Army was expected to break free. Berlin's commander, Helmuth Weidling, was expected to hold a city encircled by fire and rubble. They were demands placed on units already being crushed. By now, the bunker was less a command center than a machine for producing impossible instructions. On April 23rd and 24th, Berlin's isolation became physical. Soviet forces tightened the ring around the city, while the bunker still received fragments of news by telephone, radio, courier, and teletype. In the surrounding streets, German soldiers, Volkssturm members, Hitler Youth boys, and foreign SS volunteers faced a vastly stronger enemy. Their predicament was inseparable from the regime that had prolonged the war long after defeat was clear. Hitler's orders offered no realistic escape for the capital's population. Meanwhile, Hermann Göring sent a message from the south asking whether, under Hitler's earlier succession decree, he should assume leadership. Hitler treated it as treason and ordered Göring stripped of power. The empire's senior figures were no longer planning victory. They were fighting over who would inherit a ruin. By April 25th, Berlin was encircled. The city could no longer be relieved by a conventional operation, and the bunker could no longer pretend it commanded a coherent front. Radio links and telephone lines became lifelines, then liabilities, carrying reports of roads cut, bridges contested, and units disappearing. Wenck's battered army did move toward Berlin, but it could not break through to the center. Its more realistic role became helping soldiers and civilians escape westward from the Soviet advance. Inside the bunker, Hitler still summoned military conferences. Outside it, the cost of delay was counted in streets, cellars, hospitals, and refugee columns. The Red Army's approach was not an abstract threat on a wall map. It was artillery, close combat, and a city coming apart block by block. The bunker had become a trap because the regime's choices had made Berlin one. On April 26th, the bunker population lived under constant vibration and interrupted sleep. Josef Goebbels and his wife, Magda, had brought their 6 children underground, an image of private loyalty inside a regime that had devastated countless families. Hitler made arrangements for death and destruction. Papers were to be burned, possessions disposed of, and escape possibilities discussed in increasingly desperate terms. Cyanide capsules circulated among people in the bunker. The episode should not be treated as theatrical romance. It was the terminal ritual of a dictatorship built on mass murder, racial persecution, and war. Beyond the bunker, Nazi officials continued killing prisoners, forcing marches, and demanding resistance. It is that the state he led kept inflicting harm as it collapsed. On April 27th and 28th, the bunker received news that Heinrich Himmler had tried to open surrender talks with the Western Allies. Hitler reacted with fury, dismissed Himmler, and ordered the execution of Hermann Fegelein, Himmler's liaison officer who had left his post. Accounts differ on some details surrounding Fegelein's final hours, so the package treats the execution order as established while avoiding invented dialogue. The political meaning was unmistakable. The men who had helped build the Nazi police state were now trying to survive its collapse. On April 28th, reports also confirmed the death of Benito Mussolini and the public abuse of his body in Italy. Hitler had feared capture and humiliation. That fear helped shape what came next, but it did not erase responsibility for the catastrophe he had made. Berlin's defenders were still dying while its ruler prepared his own ending. Shortly after midnight on April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun in a brief civil ceremony in the bunker. The wedding did not soften the setting. Artillery shook the area above, and the city around them was being destroyed. Braun had chosen to remain in Berlin, but the popular image of a grand, tragic romance obscures the reality. She was joining the final hours of a genocidal regime, not escaping its consequences. Later that day, Hitler dictated a personal will and a political testament. The testament continued his anti-Semitic ideology to the end, assigning offices to successors rather than acknowledging the crimes and ruin of his rule. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz was named head of state. Josef Goebbels was named chancellor. It could not change the battlefield above. On April 30th, Soviet troops were fighting close to the Reich Chancellery district. Hitler held his final military conference and learned that relief was impossible. He dictated no plan for Berlin's civilians, no surrender that could spare the city, and no reckoning with the millions murdered by his regime. Instead, he gave instructions for his own body to be burned after his death. Around mid-afternoon, Hitler and Eva Braun died by suicide in the bunker. Their bodies were carried up to the Chancellery garden, doused with gasoline, and burned while shells fell nearby. The precise mechanics of Hitler's death have long been debated in popular culture, but the central fact is firmly established. He died by suicide on April 30th, 1945, as Soviet forces closed in. His death ended neither the violence nor the suffering at once. On May 1st, Goebbels announced Hitler's death to Germany while falsely presenting it as a heroic battlefield end. The lie was one last effort to preserve a myth. Goebbels and Magda then murdered their 6 children and died by suicide themselves, a crime that must be named plainly rather than folded into bunker melodrama. Berlin's military commander surrendered the city on May 2nd. Germany's unconditional capitulation followed days later, taking effect on May 8th in Europe. It revealed the Third Reich's final logic: a leader detached from reality, a circle of loyalists choosing death over accountability, and a city sacrificed to an impossible fantasy. Berlin's ruins were not the tragic backdrop to one man's demise. They were evidence of the price paid by millions for a regime of aggression, persecution, and genocide. Ashes of time, empires burn, stories remain,